welcome to our last dot point for how does skill acquisition affect performance. Today we're going to be looking at the assessment of skill and performance. So as usual, our major learning goal is for you to understand the judgment of skill and how the stages of skill acquisition, the characteristics of the learner and the environment impact skill performance. Our major success criteria for this whole critical question is for you to evaluate the various methods of judgment and explain the impact of the stages of skill acquisition, the characteristics of the learner and the environment on performance. We're now going to shift into our smaller sub-goals for the assessment of skill and performance. So these smaller sub-goals are quite long here today, so they're to know what characterises skilled performance, for you to distinguish between objective and subjective measures, for you to know the difference between validity and reliability and how they apply to assessment of performance, for you to know the difference between personal and prescribed judging criteria, and then for you to be able to create and be able to judge performances using your own measures. The success criteria to go along with this is for you to describe the characteristics of a skilled performer in a specific sport, for you to define and provide 2 examples of objective and subjective performance measures, for you to define validity and reliability, for you to explain how validity and reliability apply to performance assessment, for you to distinguish between personal and prescribed judging criteria, and then for you to develop and evaluate an objective and a subjective performance measure for 2 sports and then use them and think about them. Our learn about for assessment of skill and performance has you looking at characteristics of skilled learners, it has you looking at objective and subjective performance measures, has you thinking about validity and reliability of tests, and looking at personal versus prescribed judging criteria. Now, of course, your learn to here is for you to develop and evaluate objective and subjective performance measures to appraise performance. And if you want, you can go to my website, pdhpe.net, and there you can see an example of some objective and subjective performance measures that have been developed to be used in various activities. So let's start with our characteristics of skilled performers. Now here really you just want to think about an elite athlete that you know that is at the top of their game, whether that be Lionel Messi, Roger Federer, maybe Jonathan Thurston, anyone who is at the top of their sport are the people that you need to think about when you think about the characteristics of skilled performers. So when you're thinking about these people, the things that they have kinesthetic sense is number 1. Now kinesthetic sense, a very key big technical term, essentially is talking about proprioception and the athlete's ability to know whatever body position they are in and how the movement feels from the inside. So they don't need external visual things to look at their technique to know that their technique was wrong. These elite people who are very skilled in their performances, they know straight away exactly what they did wrong, and they can feel that it's incorrect. And also as they're moving about on the field, they know where their body is. That then enables them to keep really good balance, really good movements to enable them to be very fluid on the field or court or whatever it is that they happen to be playing on. Another one is anticipation. So a lot of athletes will learn to read the cues from their opposition, which then tell them what that player or competitor is going to do next. And it's very key, particularly in sports like tennis or rugby league or soccer, where you have to respond to the person who you're playing against. So obviously not very required for darts, but it is very required when it comes to those sports where you're competing against someone. And so anticipation is about your ability to read the play or the opponent and respond accordingly. So when you're looking at the player who's about to hit the ball, so let's say Rafa is about to hit the really strong forehand against Roger Federer, Federer needs to know before Rafa hits that ball where that ball is going. And he does that because he can read his body language, see the position of the ball on his racket, and determine where that ball is most likely to go, and he starts to head in that direction before Rafa's even hit it. And that then enables him to perform better because he gets that ball faster, has more time for his stroke and to execute his stroke faster, so that Rafa has less time to respond. Your skilled performers are also a lot more consistent, so they repeat their good performances over and over again. So if they're going to take a free kick from outside the box, they're going to hit top bins each time, because that's what they do. They practice it and they're very consistent in their performances. You're also going to have really good technique in these skilled performers. So technique is about making sure that their body and the performance of their skill is technically accurate. That enables their movements to be more efficient, so they're saving energy, and it also enables them to be more consistent. Okay, so being very technical improves their consistency and enables them to conserve energy. So efficient technical movements. This then also means that they are less likely to suffer an injury. So if you are very technical, then your serve is going to be better each time. You're going to serve consistently well. If you have good technical skills, then your golf swing is going to be consistent in terms of what the outcome of your stroke is going to be. If you are very good with your technique, then your kicking, your passing, whatever it is that it happens to be, your shooting, is all going to be a lot more consistent, a lot more efficient. It's going to mean that you are less likely to get injured from overuse injuries and all those types of things as well, just because your technique is really good. So skilled performers, kinesthetic sense, anticipation, consistency, and technique. We then shift to performance measures. Now, when we're measuring a performance, our measurements sit along a continuum where they are either objective or subjective. Now, objective measure is independent of the observer or independent of the person who's actually making the measurement. So if I'm measuring how far someone threw a shot put, that's very objective, because I'm going to pull out the measuring tape, and whether I'm making that measurement or not, people are going to get that very consistently. Measuring it over and over again, it's going to be very objective and not reliant on the person making the measurement. Whereas a subjective measurement is very much reliant on the observer, based on their opinions, their feelings about the movement, and their general impressions of a performance. So this tends to come up more and more in sports like dance, gymnastics, synchronized diving, where it's about impressions that are made and how the movement looks in terms of its fluidity, and making sure that it's technically accurate. And although there are within that probably some objective measures, like you want to make sure that their toe is pointed, or you want to make sure that they're twisting at a particular rate, that their head is staying still, at the same time it's also going to be quite subjective in terms of what the person sees, what they don't see, and what they're expecting of the performer. So it's very important for you to remember this sits along a continuum. So although measuring someone's height in high jump, as they jump, is relatively objective, as you shift through, even measuring someone's time for the 100 meters, in the old days when they used to use stopwatches for the Olympics and all that kind of stuff, like they probably still do for your athletics carnival, those stopwatches create a lot of bias, because it's when they see the gun go off, or when they see the smoke go up, or hear the gun, and they're going to press their button, and then it's when they see you go over the line. And it's about what they are seeing, and it relies a fair bit on the person who's measuring it, even though it's still fairly objective. And then you're going to continue to shift when you're looking at someone who plays football, for example. If they're not the one shooting and scoring all the time, say they're in the middle of the park or in the middle of the field, their role is different, and so you actually judge their performances. Maybe you're based on completed passes, or how many interceptions or tackles they make, but you're also going to look at just generally their fluidity, or what their skill and technique looks like, in terms of whether they're on their game, how many meters are they running. So you have objective and subjective performance measures coming in there, and then you keep going into your dances and your gymnastics, where it becomes less objective and more subjective. The other thing that happens with tests is that tests vary in their validity and in their reliability. So validity refers to the test's ability to measure what it is supposed to measure. So how well does the beep test actually test your endurance fitness or your aerobic fitness? Is it more accurate than doing a VO2 max test, or should I go and do a 1.6k run? There's so many different tests that can be done to measure your aerobic performance. So which one actually measures it more accurately is validity. So validity is accuracy. And then also tests have to be reliable. So reliability is about how consistent the test is. So once I've do the performance, how likely is it that it's going to get the same result for the same person in the same context, and with the same person measuring it, is it reliable? Can I give it to someone else to measure it and still be reliable? So consistency can be increased by using the same equipment, using the same checklist, using the same procedures, and using the same conditions will improve the reliability of a test. So your test, so your beep test, always 20 meters, and then you might be using a CD, or these days it tends to be just straight off an app or something on their phone, and you're measuring and you're running in the same conditions. If it's inside, out of the weather, if it's not windy, if it's not too hot, then you should perform quite well. But if suddenly those conditions change, the reliability of that test is going to change as well, because it's no longer going to be consistent according to the performance. So tests can be valid, which is the ability for it to measure what it's supposed to, and it needs to be reliable as well in terms of its consistency in measuring that performance correctly. Finally, we're moving on to judging criteria. Now, judging criteria can be either personal or prescribed, and personal tends to be more subjective, whereas prescribed seems to be more objective, and prescribed is normally used to make subjective performances more objective in terms of their measurements. So personal criteria are presumptions that are brought into the performance by a judge and are very, very subjective. So a personal judging criteria is the example I used before, where you walked into a play or a dance, it wasn't what you expected, and straight away you're going to say that that was quite bad and give it a poor review. Whenever you go to a movie, you have expectations of that movie, or whenever you're paid maybe to go and see something, or even probably as you're watching this, you have expectations of what you're getting, and if it doesn't meet your expectations, then you are going to mark that and judge it lower than if it possibly exceeds and meets all your expectations. Now, prescribed judging criteria is different. It is the established criteria normally created by the sporting body, which are then used to appraise performance or to judge performance. So whenever you're watching the people who are judging gymnastics, they have got a range of prescribed criteria that they have to tick off and check that is included in the performance, and then they give the performance the score.